Welcome back to a brand new episode of Full Metal RPG. I'm your host, Brendan Carrion. This is episode 111. Today I'm joined by Gabe. What up, playa? I haven't seen you in a hot minute. How you doing?
Oh man, I had a really rough February, in a lot of places IRL, so I needed a little bit of space. And then the last time I was gonna hop on, I ended up having a tattoo appointment that I couldn't change. But I'm back, and I am so ready to talk about RPG stuff. You can ask my girlfriend. I was like, I gotta have the alarm up for this time. I gotta have be up for this. I gotta have my coffee, all this stuff. She's like, oh man, you're excited. I'm like, I am. I get to talk about RPGs with my friends. I'm ready
to talk about RPGs. I love talking about RPGs, and I'm glad that you're here with us to do it, my friend. Welcome.
Me too. It's been way too long.
And we got Ashley. What up, Ashley? How you doing?
Hi, I'm doing fantastic, actually. Doing great. Actually, I was playing in my Pathfinder campaign last night, and I was mixing up two of the campaigns. And they're like, "How many are you in?" I was like, 6. I'm in 6 right now, and 2 of them are Pathfinders, so they kept crossing over. Anyway, so my life is RPGs right now, and I'm very excited about that.
Oh my god, I'm both envious, and I don't know how you handle it. I don't know how you handle it. And we got RBK once again holding it down. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing all right. Just having a. Actually, it's a pretty good week. So, started some new things, but we'll talk about that some other time. I think the video and the audio looks good and sounds good. So,
great.
What more could I ask for on the Wheels of Steel?
Yeah, no doubt. Now, we have this is part 7 of 6 of our politics in role playing series. We have decided to extend it past its 6 episode a target goal, because I don't know if these are our I don't know that we necessarily get a lot of love for these, but it's something that we do enjoy talking about, and I think it's something that's important for us to talk about. And I think there are some other people out in the RPG space who are talking about it, but I don't know that they're talking about it in the way that we are. So it's work that I think is important to us. It's important to our friends on Patreon, which, by the way, thank you so much to our friends on Patreon. Because this is a politics in gaming episode, we're not going to get into the black hole and listing Patreon supporters and stuff. We'd like to dedicate these episodes entirely to the subject matter. That having been said, we have so much support on Patreon right now. We are drowning in support from Patreon. Our listeners have really come through with a lot of pledge support. Thank you so much for everything that you do. Full Metal RPG is going to be going into some really awesome directions in the next year or two because of that support. And because of that, we have actually passed our first funding goal for our West Marches style Mork Borg game, the Rot Marches. And if you want to participate in that, I highly suggest you join our Discord community. Participation is, of course, limited to patrons, but there will be some AP coming out that will highlight some of that. Find our Discord community. We have open invites wherever it's found. Find our link tree. It's in the show notes. Come hang out with us on Discord. I've heard that our Discord is quite good. Some people have said that to me. I'm not on a lot of Discords. I do spend a lot of time on ours. I've heard it's quite good. So please come join us, role play with us. Thank you for your support. On to the episode, which this is kind of a heavy episode, right? I think it deserves some gravitas, so I'm not going to do the thing that I do or make a bunch of pithy remarks. Start right off with some kind of heavy thoughts. So if you're kind of like, you know what, I kind of wanted to hear about what role-playing games are good and which ones suck, I don't want to hear some heavy shit right now, then that's okay. Maybe come back later. Maybe skip this one. Those are all fine and okay alternatives. But today what we're going to actually be talking about is sort of the positioning of police officers and on really on some level law enforcement officers in general, on a scale that goes from local all the way to say international, right? And how we relate to those roles as role players in an era where people's opinions about policing and what policing means and what the effects of good policing are and look like what that means. One of the kind of ideas that we struck on right away in the first 6 of these episodes is we were talking a lot about how role-playing games tend to kind of come from genre fiction. They emerge from genre fiction. And I think it's just really important that we take a second and sort of acknowledge that the police officer as the heroic protagonist has been a part of the American landscape of genre fiction for a really long time now, much longer than anybody who's on this podcast has been alive. It's become an archetype that is so ingrained in our film, television, novels, short stories, radio plays, back when that was a thing, that it's almost an archetype that we kind of take for granted, right? But this wasn't always the way it was. In the early part of the 20th century, I'm not certain if you guys know this, but the police as an archetype were actually kind of like heels. They were like buffoons, or they were noted for their kind of corruptness. They were seen as characters that were like antithetical to the protagonist characters. And it wasn't until the mid 20th century that there was a concerted effort by Hollywood to reform the vision of what a police officer is and was and what police work looked like inside of popular media. Okay, so I'm going to take a real quick second, and I'm actually going to cue something up from Wikipedia, because my ex-wife, she put me onto this thing when we were in college. She took this class about like Latin studies, like Latina studies in America. She's a Latinx person. I'm sure she uses the Latinx at this point. I don't know. I don't speak to her anymore, but she got me onto this. She was reading this book about how the television show Dragnet was actually produced as essentially like a propaganda television show to influence people's opinions about the notoriously racist, notoriously corrupt Los Angeles Police Department. And so if you get into if you go onto Wikipedia, I don't know what book she was reading, what academic book she was reading at the time, but if you even just go onto Wikipedia and you look up police procedural, you will come upon the following paragraph. So if you'll indulge me for just a second, it says, Dragnet marked a turn in the depiction of the police on the screen. Instead of being corrupt laughingstocks, this was the first time police officers represented bravery and heroism. In their quest for authenticity, Dragnet's producers used real police cars and officers in their scenes. However, this also meant that in exchange, the LAPD could vet scripts for authenticity. The LAPD vetted every scene, which would allow them to remove elements they did not agree with or did not wish to draw attention to. Okay? Now, here we are. It's 2021. People have been watching fucking cop shows for something like 70 years that have all been based on this formula of we need to present police work as intrinsically honest and intrinsically right and good and orderly and according to the law and not racist. We have an entire culture built around this idea now. How does that reflect in role-playing? React to me.
I think it is very much intrinsic to, because like one of the first role-playing games most kids played, at least in the last century, was Cops and Robbers. Right? There was always like an argument over who, and I'm sure kids don't play Cops and Robbers anymore. I mean, maybe they do, but like,
you sure? I don't know. I don't really know any kids, but I suspect they probably do.
Well, I think this is a lot of the 50s influence, which we can blame a lot of things on the 50s. So there's that. But I think a lot of role-playing game tropes kind of weave their way in from those the antagonistic cops and robbers, cowboys and Indians, no rules, oh, you're dead. No, I'm dead. Now we have a system to determine who is dead. So like there's like, oh, I caught this person. Like, well, did you really, there's a lot of reasons why that doesn't work. But I think that's why it's intrinsic, is it kind of comes from those no rules imagination games that people were playing.
That makes sense. So last year, I don't know if you guys heard about this, you probably did, but Paizo was releasing an adventure path called Agents of Edgewatch. Are you familiar with that?
I am not. Tell me more.
So basically, the concept behind this was you were going to be the young, plucky recruit into the Agents of Edgewatch, which is like their city watch. So you were going to play a cop. And they released this in the middle of 2020. June of 2020.
Nice.
So,
oh, nice. Yeah, great. Perfect timing.
Yeah. So
that's timing.
Yeah, that is some timing. So his name's Eric something, I want to say, is the publisher for Paizo. And he actually released an entire apology before it even came out and said, we've been working on this for a few years now. The idea behind it when it started was going to be the detective noir type thing, not a cop. So his exact statement was it was going to be a classic detective story, not militarized police power fantasy. So he put out a statement before it was even releasing, like, these are the types of players that are allowed at our tables. These are the types of players that are not. And they ended up putting a portion of proceeds, I don't know how much it was, went to the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. And they put Starfinder, which is one of their biggest properties that they have, into a humble bundle that also went to a bunch of different things like the Legal Defense Fund and that. So he said that they'd been working on it for a few years and they couldn't afford to not release it, basically, but he wanted to make sure, state in no uncertain terms that this is what it was for. But when I was reading that, it kind of made me start thinking about where does the line get drawn between cops power fantasy and the detective noir type stuff, because I can see how those would kind of blend into each other.
Well, I mean, I think that when you look at the history of the police procedural, they're clearly related genres. Like the detective novel, the sleuth novel has its origins going back to the 1800s, and the professional detective, amateur detective, or group of sleuths genre kind of goes from the Victorian era, and then it leads up into the early 1900s, and in about the kind of mid 1900s, after sort of the noir wave, you start finding the whole and this again, this is a direct reaction. The way that my ex-wife put it when she was reading these books is that the thing in Wikipedia made it sound kind of soft, like the guys at NBC or whatever, hey, we want to make a show and we want to use some cop cars, but it's my understanding that there was a collaboration between the two of them, because the LAPD knew that they were considered racist, and they knew that people didn't trust them on the streets, and they needed someone to go out there and tell a story that said, you can trust these guys. And that's why Joe Friday's thing is just the facts. Just the fact. Hey, don't corrupt my investigation with your opinions. I need facts. You know what I'm saying?
PR. It was PR.
That show is just straight up dog shit too. That show is terrible.
Hot take.
My girlfriend and I were talking about it last night.
Seriously?
There's a Simpsons episode that mirrors Dragnet and Thelma and Louise, very roughly. How Simpsons will pull in references and shit. And I was like, is that end title the Dragnet card? And she was like, yeah. And I'm like, man, that show is terrible. But that's a different discussion. But yeah.
But so these elements are directly designed to kind of propagandize a friendly attitude towards law enforcement. And if you look at the noirs that you're talking about, Ashley, they actually have kind of a dim view on policing, right? If you read Raymond Chandler, he does not get along with cops. Cops don't get along with him. There's definitely this concept inside of those novels that he operates in a space between criminals who are pursuing an agenda and between cops who are pursuing a separate agenda. But the cop agenda isn't truth and justice, man. It's it's really kind of like what Snoop Dogg wants us to believe, which is that the cops are sort of a gang and they have their own operation going on, and you shouldn't fuck with it too much because then they'll kick your ass, you know. And I'm certain Raymond Chandler gets his Philip Marlowe gets his fucking ass kicked by a cop at least once in those books. Listeners, if I'm wrong, find it for me.
Yeah, well, even if you look at Sherlock Holmes, right, which is the most famous
detective
investigator pretty much of all time, like he fucking hates the cops. He thinks they fuck everything up. Like, you know, it's the detective usually, you know, it kind of gets twisted over the 20th century as coming out of noir. It starts to get twisted into this like, oh, well, I was too gravelly and badass to be a cop, so now I'm outside the law doing, you know,
yeah,
so it becomes this vigilante thing, which comes out of noir, but it's also, you know.
Well, there's actually a turning point where that expression of the cop kind of hits popular culture, and that's when the Dirty Harry film comes out. The first Dirty Harry film starring Clint Eastwood, who now we know has this like incredible catalog of like hyper conservative reactionary movies, right? But this idea of the cop who's like beyond the law, man, he's like seen too much, and he's just gonna go out there and he's basically just gonna start depriving people of their civil rights because fucking civil rights are what's holding us back. You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean,
just like this like subtle but super racist agenda.
Yeah, incredibly. And these are films.
And then Gran Torino comes out, and it's not subtle racism anymore. It's just out there. So
go ahead.
Oh yeah. I was just gonna say, I think because I did a lot of thinking like before we did this episode on like where is exactly the line that I'm like, that's not necessarily a cop thing, and it came about because I recently picked up Call of Cthulhu, I think it's Down Darker Trails, and one of the classes and stuff is sheriff, and I was like, oh, that's cool. So like me and like 3 other buddies that are like, February 14th isn't Valentine's Day, it's Arizona Day. Like that's how much we love this state. I was like, oh, this would be perfect because we could do like a Southwestern Cthulhu thing. That started making me think, and I think it's like I'm sure this will probably change as we talk more and more and more, but like I think the idea of like the old Wild West, when it really was like the Wild West, and it's like, who's the sheriff in town? And it's like, I don't know, is so-and-so still alive? All right, cool, he is. Like, just the guy that like decides to kind of make it his job to kind of police the town and like just make sure everyone's safe. Like, that's cool. But like, I think there's a point at which it becomes a fraternity, and it's like, hey, we pretty much have control of this town. Let's just like reap the benefits and shake people down and basically become almost like a mob. I think when it's just like, if you're playing as like people that are just protecting the town against like Cthulhu monsters or ghosts or whatever the hell you want to throw in, I think I'm fine with that. But again, I don't know if I'm taking a step, like a way big step forward, or
I just feel like embedded in your conversation just now, your statement, there's these words that show this bias that has been built into us as to how we perceive these organizations, these institutions, right? You say the guy who has taken it upon himself to protect. And it's like, if you look at Tombstone, right? And we talked about Tombstone in our Westerns episode, the difference between the Earp brothers and the Cowboys, which was their rival gang, is that Wyatt Earp went to Hollywood and had a bunch of movies made about the noble and pure intentions of him and his brothers, right? The actual personalities of the people who were involved in those two groups were very similar. They were both, neither one of them was particularly altruistic. They were both like essentially sociopaths who didn't mind getting what they wanted out of violence. It's just that Wyatt Earp and his brothers decided to get like a judge to say, hey, you're marshals now. You guys get to wear stars. So you own the monopoly on violence, and you can exercise it against Johnny Ringo or whatever. You know what I'm saying? So Hollywood in that case has built an implicit bias in us towards these authority figures. And then Dragnet does the same thing. And that goes all the way down to fucking Law and Order, fucking CSI, shows that you just kind of mindlessly watch, and you're like, yeah, man, Gil Grissom, he's gonna make sure my DNA is like exonerates me. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, like
I mean,
you can even like pull it forward when it's like you're watching like I don't know, like what's that fucking bullshit show where it's like both of the people are hacking at the keyboard? I don't know. It's like one of those like CSI shows or whatever. And it's like, oh no, this hacker's hacking into the Federal Reserve and he's siphoning it from all the money. Let's stop him. And I'm like, no, fuck that. Like, let him do it. Screw that.
NCIS,
Like,
Breakfast
NCIS.
of Champions.
NCIS.
my
Yeah,
mom's
like-
favorite show. I would love to do a YouTube channel just called Brendan Watches NCIS with his mom because
Oh,
her
God.
takes on NCIS are fucking hilarious and they're
Yeah.
so lit. Anyway.
I guess what I'm getting at is, and I'm understanding and acknowledging everything you're saying. I just want to say I'm not just trying to be like, I'm blowing you off. But
It's
I
an
think
exchange of ideas. Let's exchange them.
right. So I guess my next question for that point would be: is it necessarily not cool, I guess, to want to play those cowboys defending their town against like Cthulhu stuff? Like, would you yourself be like okay with that and like play like the marshals or whatever fighting against a wave of like tentacle boys?
This is seriously the crux of what we've come here to talk about today,
Yeah.
which is okay. So this summer, amidst the madness of the George Floyd riots and
Right.
the anger of marginalized communities at the way that they're policed, and the fact that for once, like white people were waking up to the fact that this stuff is happening because they're seeing it on video. I mean, we saw it on video when it happened to Rodney King, but people created a story where they're like, well, that dude had it coming. And it's just like, finally, we had white people who were watching videos of a crime being committed against a person, right? A random person, and they were saying, no, that's not okay. Like what, this is what's going on. This is what it's like in the daily life of a black person. You have to walk down the street wondering if maybe if you do something wrong, this could happen to you. That's not okay. And
Even if you don't do something wrong, you could just be standing there in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Well, I guess what I mean is if you make the wrong move, if you make if you make a move that somebody perceives in a particular way, then you're in fucking. You could lose your life. You could lose your life for that. And we live in the same cities on the same planet, next to our black friends, coworkers, neighbors, and relatives, but we do not live in their world. You know what I'm saying? And we're getting some views into that. And during that time, I chose to buy Delta Green. I was like, cool.
I was gonna bring that book up at some point today.
I was like, I should play Delta Green with my friends. And so I started reading this, and I was like, this is cool. This is a cool game. It's neat. It's got a bunch of shit in it that, like, it reminds me of other games I like for instance, Dark Conspiracy. You know, it's these are just like classic tropes that, like, I kind of want to do this stuff. It's like it's kind of neat and fun. But then I bought a module for it, and the module was all basically just about like, okay, your FBI agents and the local law enforcement guys are kind of making they're fucking up this investigation. So we're sending you in, and you're gonna figure out the real supernatural shit. And every page was like, investigate the scene, interrogate the witnesses, correlate ideas, and I was like, oh shit, fuck, man, I'm playing a bunch of cops. These are just straight up cops.
Yeah.
Like, do I really want to go to my gaming group and be like, hey guys, let's play cops? And I thought to myself, no, I kind of don't. That sounds super shitty. But what does that mean that it sounds super shitty? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I was playing Eternal Lies last summer, and my character was a New York City detective. Like, I was like, I mean, we weren't in New York City, so I had no power. Like, literally, but she was also, it was interesting that was a female detective who was basically on the sex abuse end of things in the 1930s. So it was interesting, but also it didn't really come into play. So it didn't really like make any sense why they made this character like drag them into like, oh, we need somebody that was, but it really, I seriously had thoughts like, well, maybe I shouldn't be playing this character anymore. But then I was like, well, I'm not on the beat. I'm literally just another like investigator, Cthulhu investigator. I just happen to be good at investigating. Like, it was real hard to try to grapple with the idea. Like, I wasn't really a fan of cops beforehand, but like none of the other characters were very interesting to me in the pre-gens because we all just picked pre-gens. And I was like, well, this person at least had some kind of like connection to people and was like at least, good at investigating. So I was like, well, because she was the only female cop on the New York City police, because we're playing in the 1930s. So there's like,
Right.
And she would help the victims by being like the somebody they could actually talk to, and that was kind of. But
I think you're hitting on something here, dude, which is one of the ways that our suspicions about institutional authority and its abuses have been assuaged by the same media that is also propping up these institutions, right? And that is this archetype of the inside man, okay? And that's gendered language, obviously. The inside person, okay, which is like, well, the institution of policing is bad, but there's this one good cop, and his name is Mulder, and he lives in the basement working those cold cases.
No, don't do that to Fox Mulder.
He's got sweat running down his brow as he's out there. He's trying to find the truth, and he's the one.
It's out there.
I think when you're playing Delta Green, I think that they kind of want you to maybe see yourself that way. But I also kind of get the feeling that the people who wrote Delta Green are kind of like institutionally very enamored with the institution of policing. I think that they're very kind of because the way that those books are written and the way those adventures are written are very soft towards them. Gabe, go ahead. I interrupted you. What do you have to say?
Oh, no. You're good. You saying the enamored with like being the inside like lone wolf kind of a thing reminded me of, and this is before 2020. This is probably like 3 years ago. I was talking about RPGs with a buddy of mine, and he was playing GURPS. And I was like, oh, that's cool. At the time, they're doing like paranormal ghost hunting kind of a thing. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. And he's like, yeah, we're winding the campaign down. And then next, we're going to do like an army one. And I was like, oh, really? And he's like, yeah, we're going to be Navy SEALs in GURPS in Vietnam. And I was like, ooh, like, why would you want to play that? Like, that's like... Whoever wrote that, that's like very much like the lone wolf kind of a thing. And I think that there's a lot more of those that we just really haven't passively thought about, like where they're coming from, because of the thing that you said, where it's like we're kind of like entranced in this media and this fiction. Fiction, I guess that's up for debate, but for me, it's fiction of like how like all cops are fine, all wars are justified and shit like that. And it just like that reminded me of that Vietnam campaign, because it's like I feel like most people, if you really read about Vietnam and took more than like an hour to just read the Wikipedia entry, you'd realize like we were the baddies in that. Like that was not a cool time.
I mean, there's some kind of apocryphal thing that has surfaced recently that says that George Lucas's impetus to write the Star Wars movies was to write about Vietnam from the perspective of the Vietnamese, right?
Yeah.
And I think that, I mean, I don't know about that. I think there's definitely something to that. I mean, this gets back into our discussions about like empire and like capitalism, manifest destiny, the nature of like what does authority mean and the responsibilities that come with it. I think when we kind of go back to Fox Mulder and we kind of go back to the idea of like the rogue cop, the renegade cop, right? This idea gets kind of presented to us in a couple of ways. We see the Dirty Harry style cops who are outside the institution of policing and who are prosecuting this vigilante justice, destroying people's civil rights. But then we also have the kind of myth of the cop who is working inside the system, saving the system from itself. And that's an important myth that people who are in positions of institutional power have to keep us believing in. we have to believe that even if we think that the institution itself is corrupt, that there is someone inside of it who will use their personal leverage to somehow be our champion inside of the system. When what we know from like literal like science is that institutions actually affect people. People don't change institutions. Institutions change people. And so when when our detractors go on and leave fucking reviews first, and they're like, this critical race theory baloney, and it's just like, but that is, I'm sorry detractors, but if you read the Stanford Prison Study, I'm sorry, like institutions change people. So this idea of like, oh, there's that one cop who's gonna redeem the FBI,
Well, most media has that, like, oh no, you're okay. You're very passionate about this. I totally expected this to be a big thing. So most media has the special one, the one that's gonna come in, and that's who they want you to relate to. They want to make this a relatable person that is like the chosen one who's gonna go out and affect change and all of that. But when it comes to, so I get that, and the whole plucky recruit that wants to come in and make things better. So one thing that I don't think you guys knew, my grandpa was a cop. He was chief of police in the town that they lived in. And so I grew up hearing from my dad that he did not trust cops because he saw, as he was growing up, the people who would be there. Do I want to think my grandpa was a good person? Yeah, I never met him. He died before I was born. But odds are he was not that one, So the people that he hung out with that were over, my dad grew up seeing them as humans and as people and the type of people they were, and then knew that they were the police force for the town that he lived in. So he was like, the type of people who are drawn to that type of profession are generally people who want to be in some sort of power over people. So I grew up having kind of a healthy distrust of police officers for that reason. So is there humans, and the types of humans that are drawn to that type of profession are generally the ones who are going to use that to have power over people, which is generally not a good thing. So
I think it kind of comes back. You said the words monopoly of violence, right?
Yes.
And that role-playing games is, at least initially, was framed as, being player characters. You kind of like, you could do whatever you want. So like people that played this kind of game were typically into, they were young people, usually boys, who were like into, solving problems violently. Like that was a fun idea. And that was like, oh, that's cool. And the monopoly of violence, it's sort of like the cops sort of act like player characters would a lot of times. Like, oh, I have all the authority I could ever want to do whatever the fuck I want. Right. Mm-hmm. So it's no coincidence that police kind of act like player characters, because they have all the authority and the kind of monopoly of violence that they could ever want to do the thing to get to fix whatever they think is wrong.
You can drag and drop and it still works, is essentially what it is. Like you can take the elf, the wizard, the cleric, and then just replace it with like, okay, these are 3 Phoenix PD cops, and it still fucking works.
Yeah.
Like,
when you and your friends are the ones that are going to make the law, uphold the law, whatever, like you can do whatever you want. Your friends are going to cover for you. So that's how you get that monopoly on violence.
Here's something. When you talk about the institution of policing, people want to talk about the bad apples theory, right? Like, oh, there's just a few bad apples, and it's kind of like the law of averages, right? Like it's almost like confirmation bias. Like you hear about the bad apples because they're the ones doing bad apple shit, right? But let me ask you this. At any workplace you've ever been, right? Has there been like a clique of people who you knew were kind of like taking too long lunch breaks and like maybe like pocketing like product or something, or doing something that you knew was like unethical. You knew it was deeply unethical, and you were just like, whatever. But you knew who the people in that clique were, right? Am I right?
Yeah.
Sure. At every workplace. Now we're talking about a workplace where that clique of people goes around oppressing minorities, beating people up, depriving people of their civil rights, literally committing crimes with their badges, using their badges to commit crimes. And unlike us, who are like, oh well, we saw someone like grab a Snickers bar, like whatever. I'm not gonna fucking narc out somebody for grabbing a Snickers bar. But these other cops, the barrel of the good apples, they don't do anything to stop this clique. They don't do anything to stop this rotten apple gang that is inside of their mix, which means that they are part of the institution that supports them. They are part of that problem. They buffer them from retribution by the system. Because and there's a lot of talk about like, well, oh, we know that if we go to internal investigations is going to turn the light on us and stuff. And it's like, okay, that's all fine. I get that the system itself has these intrinsic biases and is designed to create certain outcomes. But at that point, you have to ask yourself, why are you still part of that system? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You can quit, dog. You don't have to be part of the fucking paramilitary force that is designed to enforce the line between where the brown neighborhood ends and the white neighborhood begins. You know what I'm saying? You don't have to wake up every morning and do that, but you still choose to, which means you're part of the problem.
Kind of speaking to that, I am white. I'm a white person, and I.
Wait a minute. What? No.
Yes, I am. Just to clear that up. Yes, Ashley Smith. So, in a previous life, I was married. My last name was not always Smith. I was married to a man from Mexico, and I never really had. I mean, I had my dad's stories of growing up with police officers around and all of that. So I had my thoughts on things, kind of, but I never actually saw it until me and my ex-husband were driving. I had taken him to the river, I think, or the lake or something. There's something I wanted to show him out there. And it was just a really nice day. We were driving back and we got pulled over by police officers. And so I was just like, oh, whatever, it's fine. Just give them your ID, get along the way. It's fine. So they pulled us out of the car, made us sit separately on the side of the road out in the middle of the desert. We weren't around civilization. So thinking now, this could have gone very badly and no one would have known because we were out towards like the lake and the river. There was not a lot out there. They made us sit on the side of the road. They had two cops asking us questions. He called for backup. So there were two cop cars. We were sitting on the side of the road asking questions separately, and they were tearing his car apart. Like they took out the stereo deck on his car to look at it. They were looking everywhere. And I'm just like, what's going on? And my ex-husband was just kind of like, just let it happen. Like, just don't say anything. And then, we can talk about it later. So when, we were there for probably half an hour, just sitting out on the side of the road while they looked through every inch of his car. And when they finally gave me the keys to drive back, by the way, they told me that I could drive his car. They gave his car keys to me and made me drive away. That he matched the description of someone who had been stealing stereos out by the river. And so when we got in the car, he's like, well, I'm a Mexican in a blue Honda. So, of course. And I was like, that's ridiculous, though. So just the fact that I have never been treated like that since. I was never treated like that before that. And I've done some shady shit. Like, my ex-husband was actually a pretty decent person when it came to that kind of thing. I've never had to deal with anything like that except for when it came to him, because they were, I don't know. It's got to be a race thing.
Oh, right, because you match the description, which is like the most. I mean, that's the lamest excuse in the entire world. They all, and it's the one that they deploy. Like, it builds into the sort of like confirmation biases that accompany the system, like the kind of just the nature of like the Carrion, that we've seen also in video, that we've seen for a couple of years on video, like these white people calling the police on black people for just doing something, like, oh, you're in public and you're having fun.
Yeah, you're existing in my area, and how dare you be here and be present in my area.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that we start really seeing what the real fucking function of these structures is, which is to, enforce segregation, right?
Mhm.
To enforce class and to protect property, right? Because the police are worth nothing if they're not worth drawing some kind of line where like, oh, these are the businesses we protect, and then over here it's just kind of like, whatever, do what you want over there. Richard, I see you falling back exasperated. What you have to say?
So I got some feedback from Discord and from Twitch, so, of people watching us on Twitch and still on Discord. The thing that made me kind of fall back was Kirby on the Discord says, I want to know definitively from the experts here on Full Metal RPG why cops are so soft and tender when my social worker friends get assaulted regularly and always manages to de-escalate the situation. And in that same vein, what is the best way to prepare and cook such tender pork? Anyway, and then I got Nolanda over here in the Twitch is like, the two myths we're talking about with the are actually really interesting, showing very little faith in institution policing. Dirty Harry acts like a vigilante because the authors are expressing the idea that the institution is constrained by rules and about civil rights due to process preventing them from serving. Meanwhile, Fox Mulder is a lone truth seeker in a corrupt institution. Seems that they're both negative impressions of the institution in general. And also, and this is something that I was going to mention, was the Stanford prison study has been debunked completely as a fake. So
has it?
Yes.
Oh, this is new to me.
So you'll have to look into it, but it has been debunked completely.
Oh, no.
So that was
By whom?
Well, a lot of people have
That's my
studied it
question
and
is who?
and found out that they basically faked a lot of shit.
For a Stanford prison study. Yep. Come on, bro.
But I think the point stands that the institutions do change people. It's just maybe not in the radical way that the Stanford prison study might have shown.
Stanford prison study is always a good shorthand for me when I'm trying to talk to people about this. People often know what it is, and it's like a simple thing that you can look up and you can read about. So it's a real bummer that I've lost that rhetorical point. The truth of it, I think the fundamental truth of it, as you just said, still stands. When I was in college, that Marxist institution, liberal college,
you bastard!
I know. I've been. Well, you can tell I've been.
Pinko.
You paid for such a terrible institution, yeah.
At that point, Joe Rogan was on Fear Factor, guys. I was watching Fear Factor every night. He was just making people eat bugs at that time. He wasn't educating the masses. If only I had gone.
All right, guys, I gotta go.
I could have saved so much money by just listening to 4 years worth of Joe Rogan. Anyway,
oh fuck.
Yeah, I know. Fail. Marxism fail. Anyway, so where was I going with this? When I was in college, I got a political science degree. I have a political science degree, and one of the classes I took was about political institutions all over the world, in terms of lawmaking bodies and authoritative bodies and stuff. I thought it was interesting, and on the first day, the teacher is never. This is one of the college experiences I had that left an indelible mark upon me as a person. Very formulative. The teacher, he walks in, he writes on the blackboard. He writes, "Institutions breed incentives." Okay, and then he's like, "Read what it says." And we're all like, "Institutions breed incentives," and he goes, "All right, I need you to read it again, one more time. Institutions breed incentives." And then the entire class for that entire semester was going through, well, here's how parliament works. Here's how first past the post voting works. Here's how winner takes all voting works and what that means, right? And he goes, here's how countries that make sure that election day, you have the day off from work. Here's the results that you get out of that compared to a country like America where you don't get the day off of work to go vote, right? What incentives does this institution breed, and how does it affect the outcomes? And at the time, I was like, oh, wow, politics, right? 20 years later, whenever I pick up a role-playing book, I think back to that political science class. I think to myself, what incentives do the institution of the die rolls, the institution of the classes, the way the skills are set up, the way the powers are set up, the way the experience point system is set up.
Experience points, that's the institution that drives a lot of this.
Yeah, maybe. What incentives am I being given by the text? And so this idea that somehow institutions are not generating outcomes in the world is boggling to me, as though everybody just wakes up in the morning and has their own ideas and just walks around committing 100% of their own ideas, never being influenced by the institutions that surround them constantly. Does that make sense?
It does. I think that those institutions have kind of come into being, placeholders to make behavior in role-playing games move in a direction that the designers want, that the game masters want, that to emulate the genres, right?
Absolutely.
So
sometimes people are like, I get this a lot when I talk about role-playing games. I say, D&D is a terrible game for role-playing. And there's nothing in that game that actually incentivizes role-playing. And they go, people will like, the critical role generation, they'll like jump up and they'll like pound the table. They'll be like, I've had such great times role-playing D&D. Of course it makes you role-play. It's the best role-playing game there ever was. And I'm like, homie, my friend, I'm glad that you had a good table, and I'm glad that you had a good GM, and I'm glad that you had a good series of sessions.
Yeah.
But there's nothing in the book that makes you do that. Nothing.
Yeah.
You don't need the book at all. Throw it out.
They just barely implemented an incentive in 5e after how many years to like role play, and even then it's not mandatory, which is just like inspiration. Like,
look at you, bust out your character sheet, bust out your D&D 5 character sheet, and tell me what on there you're supposed to role play.
Yeah, it doesn't actually. Yeah, and that's the thing too, is like it's that incentive is just barely there with inspiration, and it's still up to the DM, But you have other systems too, like. For example, I've been playing a lot of Masks lately, and like by role, actually like working as a team, we can get the equivalent of what's like team forward. If you guys know like forward and shit from PBTA, like that right there is immediately better than 5e in that. But no, I agree, and I think that's like why I'm very picky and choosy with who I play with, and it's because of years of going to people's tables, and it's like, oh, cool, so we're just gonna be the murder hobos with no personality. All right, I just wasted my Saturday night. See ya.
Yeah. So you paid your Saturday night to realize you never have to game with them again. Yeah. So let's kind of dig into. I mean, we've been kind of talking a lot. We've been kind of talking around the edges a little bit. Let's get into this. Let's kind of issue some of our own takes. We've had some kind of thought time to explore some ideas. Let's talk about our individual takes. Like, is role-playing cops ethical? And if it is ethical, under what circumstances? And if it's not ethical, then like why? And what does that mean? What should we do? Like, I want to hear from specific people. Let's start with someone who hasn't talked much, and I'll let you decide who that is, because I feel like everybody's talking. Gabe, go ahead.
Oh, me? Okay.
Yeah, it's you. I decided it's you. Everybody's too polite.
The take of let me have you say that one more time, because I feel like I'm going to go the complete opposite direction of the way that you're asking for.
Yeah, who cares? Go for it.
If you want me to go before you, I will.
Yeah, please.
Okay.
I'm still like trying to think of how I want to word this.
No, go ahead, Ashley. Lay it on me. What you got?
I think that with anything that you play in a role-playing game, it depends on how you play it. So can you play a cop? Absolutely. And you can play, because you don't have that institution to corrupt you and all of that, you can play it, and you can be the rogue individual that's going to go out and do your thing, because you're not going to have that real-life IRL influence of this whole other system that's influencing you. So if you want to play the sheriff that is protecting the town from the tentacly boys, you can do that. I don't see why not. It's all in how you play it.
If I may, I would. Is the reason why not because then you're mythologizing an institution? Like, I mean, you could also say like, oh, I'm playing a benevolent dictator. I'm playing the one military dictator who's a philosopher king.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, there are dragons. There are literal dragons. Like, this isn't real life. So if you want to take it and make it your own thing, you can. Now, as far as playing, I mean, if you wanted to militarize power fantasy, take it and be this, lawful evil paladin or something, I don't know, where you want to take it and do the corrupt thing, you can do that too. Like, role playing is what you make it. So if you want to take this thing and you want to play it a certain way, you can do that. So there's absolutely nothing that's keeping you from playing something that is seen as evil or bad in the real world and making it good. I think that actually playing characters that are kind of against what they should normally be is fun. I think that adds depth to it, and it makes it a lot more fun to role play it.
I think there's nothing inherently bad with wanting to like play, and I'm glad you went first because you can't kind of give me a platform to get this point that I was like trying to come up with. I don't think it's necessarily bad, and I think it's actually kind of, in a way, for some people, it might be cool for them to like play like, hey, we're actually the good cops saving, the town, because that's something that, like, let's be real, like, that's probably never going to be the case for like most police stations. Like, once they are fully corrupt, like that's pretty much it. It's going to take a lot for that to turn around. So to live in this fantastical world where, like, hey, we actually are going to like root out all the evil, and we're actually going to bring this kind of like justice to the police by, I don't know, like finding out the police sheriff or captain or whatever is like secretly, I don't know, in a pact with Cthulhu or something. And like by going through and doing this wondrous campaign of fighting tentacles and cops and shit like that and being the saviors of the town, that's going to fix everything. Or even being like, kind of like the Western cowboys that are rooting out the bandits in town and whatnot. Like, I think that if that's the thing that you enjoy and you want to live in that fantasy world, like, that's awesome. But at the same time, I think that while it's not required, it should be important to kind of know the implications of like what you are choosing to play versus what the reality of the situation is,
See,
so I think
I feel like with both of your, first of all, I want to kind of touch on something that Khaldun said when he came on about, and he's talking about Dune, and he's like, I don't need to necessarily role play my own personal philosophies all the time. Okay,
yeah.
Like, I don't need there to be like a strong Marxist. This is what he said. I don't need there to be a strong Marxist like backbone to like every game that I'm in. And I completely agree. I completely understand. I actually think that there's some really interesting play in the moral dynamism of like, this question that's on the cover of every episode or every issue of the Alan Moore comic book, The Watchmen, which is who watches The Watchmen. What does it mean to be the person who exists on some level outside of law because you are the law? Like, I think there's a lot of story in there. However, like, I feel like with both of your examples, are so kind of like used to the idea of the good guy cop, good person cop, that and this is just me, and this is not an ad hominem attack. I feel like you're both being very soft on it. You're both of you are saying like it's okay to create a power fantasy in which these are the hero guys. But if I was to say like, well, does that mean it's okay to do a power fantasy where your SS officers are the hero guys? Like, what if that's my genuinely held belief, and me and my friends all agree that like we sit around the table and like we're gonna play the SS and we're gonna fucking clean up Germany, man. We're gonna fucking save the future of the white race. There are guys who do that. There are games of people who do that, and obviously anyone who goes out and buys the books and enters into the social contract with their friends at the table if we're going to role play, I can't control what you're role playing. People can do whatever they want with their role playing game, but is it ethical? Is what I'm saying.
So let me ask you this then, as a counterpoint. So we all here love horror and gore and all of that. What if someone told you, I think it's really fucking weird that you enjoy playing a game like Cult, where there's like flaying of skin and like satanic rituals and shit like that. Like, why don't you just play something a bit more tame like D&D or, Fate or something like that. Like, I think it's really weird that you like to have body parts being ripped off and shit like that. Cause that's kind of how I see it too. Cause it's like, I don't like, I feel like my politics I wear on my sleeve a lot, like if you know me personally, and where my stance on police are in general. So it's kind of like I don't, and this isn't necessarily an attack against you or anything, but I don't feel like I have to prove how I feel about cops and stuff. And like one of my favorite modules for World of Darkness alone is Tales from the 13th Precinct, where you just play cops, because I love the
Great
idea.
book. Absolutely fantastic book.
Yeah, I grew up playing Resident Evil 2 a shitload, and my favorite character was Leon, who was the cop that was stuck around zombies. Like, that was cool because he had access to the guns and stuff. So like being able to play that using that reference and source book was cool to me. But at the same time, like, I also feel like I do understand where you're coming from, where it's like maybe I am a little soft or whatever, but at the same time it's kind of like, you know what, maybe I am, but at the same time, like, this is what I want to play. I want to play the sheriff's cleaning up the town or whichever, and it's not necessarily going to make me feel bad by doing that. That's not necessarily holding how I feel about cops in general, because, and I'm not going to waste everyone's time, but like, I have so many stories where I had awful run-ins with police. And again, if you know me, you know my stance on how I feel about police in general, which it's not good. So
spoilers.
Yeah.
Ashley, please react.
I see. I'm having a hard time with that because the SS, bad. They are bad. They did horrible things. They committed atrocities against humankind. I'm not saying that cops don't do that. So I can't say like, oh, well, they're worse than cops, because they're not. Cops do awful things, clearly.
Sure.
So
look into the Chicago black sites from just like a few years ago, and then it turned out, guess what? When Joe Arpaio got taken out, turns out there were black sites in Arizona too. Womp womp.
Yeah.
Shocking.
So so that's a hard one for me to answer. Honestly, is ethically, is it okay? Is it not okay? Is it tired? Probably. I mean, the fact that, like you said, it's been centuries of playing the cops and the robbers and things like that. So can you come up with a more creative idea? Probably. You probably could. From an ethical standpoint, I wouldn't do it. I would not play one of those characters. But if someone at my table said they wanted to play a cop, I would probably give them side eye. But depending on how they described it and how they played it, I'm not going to automatically think that they're a bad person for wanting to play.
Oh, sure. Well, I mean,
someone like that.
And I want to make sure that there's a division here between the morality,
moral and ethic,
and the ethics of it. Like, and what is ethical behavior at our table, and what is, as within our groups. Because Full Metal RPG, I really believe this is a group effort. Everything. We're a group here. We're a tribe.
Yeah.
Go on the Discord and you'll see the tribe. It's wonderful people, and we're all working together to take care of each other and to push each other forward. And I don't take offense at all, Gabe, to you pushing back on my idea.
Oh no.
I want people to push back on my ideas, and I want to push your ideas too. That's why we're here.
I think I like. And I've talked to people about this too, because like, hey, for those that don't know, I'm Hispanic. I'm Mexican. I grew up in a shit neighborhood. We had bars on our windows, and our backsliding door was shot out in a drive-by. So just letting you know, I'm not trying to like brag or anything, but like those are the conditions I grew up in. So I was around cops a lot too. So it's like, I think that like rolling all the way back to like 2020, when all of these protests and everything were happening too, I think that for some, there was almost a shift too, where like I'm very pro people educating themselves and stuff about what it was like for me, and what is it like being a person of color, especially in a state that has a lot of pushback against Hispanics and whatnot. But at the same time too, I also have come across people too, which kind of irritate me, where it's like they almost want to kind of like police me on like my speech and like where I go and stuff. And I'm not saying policing speech or anything is bad. I just want to say, but it's almost like I get, and I can't help it, I get this feeling of like, it took you this long to give a shit, So it's like, no, like I'm going to do what I want to do. And like, I'm sorry that you just barely in the last 6 months started caring, but like, this is how I've been for years, and this is kind of how I feel about this subject matter and stuff. And I've talked to you guys in private kind of about, like word uses and shit. So you kind of know I'm not like going right wing or anything here, but like that's kind of how I feel about certain things too. So like, and the only reason it made me think of is because like if I did want to play like a character like a cop, because in let me move this window, because like in a game of Monster of the Week, I played pretty much the equivalent of John Wick, but I worked for like a secret agency and kind of stuff. And I feel that like if someone was to, and again, I love you, Ashley, but like if someone was to give me side eye, I'd kind of be like, no, like I'm gonna fucking play this character. Like, I grew up with police constantly like in our neighborhood beating up people of color because, hey, we lived in the fucking barrio, So like I know what the consequences of that is. My brother was harassed by a cop because he was walking around the mall. It's like, you don't have to tell me that they're bad. I know they're bad for this campaign. I just feel like playing a cop because it fits the story. And if I want to play a good cop, cool. If I don't want to, that's fine too. I don't necessarily need someone to tell me, hey, that's a bad thing, So it's like, again, kind of a spicy take, but I feel like since we're on that subject matter, that's kind of how I feel about it.
Well, this is a spicy episode. This is a spicy episode, and it's an exchange of ideas, and it's a place where we can all feel free we should all feel safe,
Right.
It's a safe space for us all to express our ideas without them being considered ad hominem attacks, which is on some level what the internet is kind of like lacking right now. Like everything is a
right
ad hominem attack. But I see us as like just a group of people who are attempting to discover truth by testing the edges of each other's ideas. And I think that, Gabe, you really hit on something when you kind of threw it back in my face and was like, well, what about horror, bro? Like, why you want to spend your Friday nights describing like the inside of a meat packing plant, only instead of beef, it's people.
Humans.
You know like, I get it. It's just, and we did a whole episode about like, is horror even in the ethical genre? Is it even ethical to bust out a horror game and be like, oh, there's a clown and he's killing kids. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
What's that? What the fuck is that even about, bro? And I think that we maybe had some answers for ourselves at the time, but these answers that we feel and that we come to have a lot of room for dynamic play. We have a lot of room to take in new information and to reevaluate our feelings constantly, and to put those feelings and thoughts into practice at the table and at our community, and really to be aware of what it is that we expect from our communities and what it is that we're putting into our communities and taking out. So I think we're talking a lot about just intentionality here, about like, is it morally wrong to play a cop? No. Is it morally wrong to want to play a cop? No. What if you're that dude who shows up to every session and every time it's a new game, he goes like, my wife was killed and I was an orphan and I have a black leather jacket and I'm a cop and I gotta take the justice to the streets and civil rights are holding me back, so I'm doing it with my katana. And you're like, well, all right, dude.
I feel too a lot. I feel like too like a lot of it comes with timing, because last night I was talking to my girlfriend while we were playing video games and stuff, and she's in roller derby, and I guess one of the roller skate brands that she uses, like she loves these skates that she uses for derby. Well, they kind of have a very Blue Lives Matter stance, which to us is like lame,
No.
Yeah. So it's kind of like, you can, again, this is not my stance, but in this country, you have a right to support that if you wish. Okay. I'm not going to tell you like, you can't do that. You can do that if you want. Okay. I fucking don't agree with you, but
clearly you're like allowed to.
Yeah, you're allowed to. It doesn't necessarily mean it's cool.
The First
but
Amendment.
The thing is, though, is that exactly. But the thing is, though, is that it's about timing, and they chose to take that stance during a very well publicized set of protests. The fact that you choose to state that around that time tells me your intention. And going off of like kind of what you're saying, like, is it morally okay to play a cop? No. But the thing is, though, is that if I was starting a new campaign and you chose to be a cop around the same time that these protests are going on, I would take the Ashley stance and be like, I'm going to give you some fucking side eye because you chose to play that character around that time. But, let's rewind 3 years ago, 4 years ago, and there's not really, okay, I'll say 10 years ago, just, for the sake of argument. And there's not much stuff, let's just say it's a quiet year and you choose to do that. It's going to be a lot different than summer of 2020 when people are, taking to the streets in protest of George Floyd's death and stuff. And you're like, no, I'm going to be a cop. I'm going to be like, no.
Yeah, I mean, when we're talking a lot about media here, we're talking about how policing is represented in media, and I don't think that we'd be doing our jobs if we didn't bring up The Shield, right? Are you guys all familiar with The Shield?
I haven't watched it. I don't watch cop shows unless it's Brooklyn Nine-Nine, which is now canceling itself because it knows that it's bad. So... No, not Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. The S.H.I.E.L.D. is... Yeah,
The S.H.I.E.L.D. The S.H.I.E.L.D. was
the bald dude?
Yeah, Vic Mackey.
The guy that used to kick down doors?
Yeah. There's an FX like sort of soap opera for males called The S.H.I.E.L.D.
Yeah.
And it's about a group of super corrupt police officers in a Los Angeles police district, a fictional Los Angeles police district, and the central protagonist of the show's name is Vic Mackey, and his name has actually been co-opted by like a hardcore right-wing podcaster who very recently was he doxxed, and it turns out he's actually a Hispanic dude who calls himself Vic Mackey and does like ethno-nationalist white supremacist podcasting. And the character of Vic Mackey is racist. He's corrupt. He's fucking violent. He acts outside of institutional authority and deprives people of their civil rights in every single episode. He is an interesting character because you are really torn when you're watching the show between your feeling of wanting him to succeed at what he's doing and also wanting him to fail and become punished. He's a criminal. His character is like literally over the course of like the 5 to 7 seasons that the show takes place, his group of his cell of police officers become a street gang, and the show is about the kind of way he's digging himself in deeper and deeper with his criminal enterprises while trying to outrun the consequences for them. Is that show irresponsible? Potentially. There's a fucking
because it's
yeah. I mean, like right wing media guy is calling himself Vic Mackey.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Now, as Khaldun pointed out in the Dune episode, right wingers are like notoriously dense about satire. They're notoriously dense about symbolism. I genuinely think that if you watch The S.H.I.E.L.D., it's a show about the failures of policing. It's a show that's very much about the fact that the cops are a gang. But it's also a soap opera, and it also there'll be times when it's a very high tension soap opera, and you're sitting on the edge of your seat, and you're like, "Oh God, how's Vic gonna get out of this pickle?" You know what I'm saying?
The Vickle.
So it's
Vickle.
there's a lot of gray area in here. There's a lot of play. Richard, we haven't heard from you in a minute, man. It seems like you kind of wanting to wrap this up.
I had my statement about role playing a cop, and I think this is the same. This is the same thing I think we could say for most of these most of these episodes is. I think that the point of these episodes and the point of talking about them is playing cops. If you're going to play a cop, be informed. Be informed.
Yeah.
Don't be tone deaf. That's like literally we could just like post that every time we say political game. Don't be tone deaf.
Yes.
That's really my summation statement. That's what I was trying to do when I was playing a cop recently. I was trying not to be tone deaf about what I was doing, but also trying to stop the terrible undead god from coming back to life and killing everyone. You know,
that sounds tight as fuck.
It's rad. We're getting close to finishing. And then I have a couple questions from the patrons.
Oh, let's hear them.
Okay.
Well, here, how about this? I will real quick come in with my thought, and then we'll hear the questions, which is, I think policing as an institution is an interesting story form. I don't believe in topics that are off limits. I'm a big advocate for cult, as Gabe pointed out. I'm a big advocate for genre pushing. I'm a big advocate for transgressive role playing. Of course, you have to have the consent of your table. Of course, you have to have safety tools. I still believe that cops are, and the nature of what law and order is, and the nature of what criminality is. These are like, I mean, fucking Nabokov like wrote about this shit. You know, Tolstoy wrote about this shit. What is the nature of crime? You know. So clearly, I think that these things should be on the table as tools for us to express ourselves with. And as Richard said, it's beholden upon ourselves to make sure that we're telling stories that are rich and multifaceted. And it's it's beholden upon us to be responsible with what we do with them. If you're a GM, man, no, I mean, this is what goes down. This, just like you said, with every episode, know what story you're telling. Do some deconstruction on your own fucking story before you tell it. Don't be a chud. Just don't be a fucking chud. You know, if you want to play like a fucking, if you want to play a cop, you want to play a dirty cop, but that better be a fucking horror game. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it has to have fucking spooky ghosts, but it does mean that there has to be some horror in it. The horror of what this institution does to people. The way that it grinds up the people that are inside of it. Let's have some questions, RBK.
All right.
I just want to say real quick, I love when you go spooky ghosts. You bust that out a lot, and it's like one of my favorite things.
Why? Thank you.
So, from Kirby again, do you institute a form of systematic oppression in your games as a ethical hurdle for the world and the players to live in, or is that too real? Genuine curious about that.
My hot take on that, just right out the gate, is that's something you have to be very, very careful with. Okay, so I'm going to kind of roll this back to what Ashley, when I kind of was like, well, riddle me this, Ashley. What about the SS officers? In the 1990s, White Wolf came out with a book called Charnel Houses of the Shoah, and it was a book for Wraith where you can play wraiths that live in Auschwitz, right?
Ooh.
This book has a lot. Right. You're the ghosts of the victims of a death camp, and there's Nazi ghosts there. There's Holocaust ghosts there. What do you do when you're in the fucking death camp ghost world? Some people have come out real strongly and said this book exists as an intellectual exercise to read, and it does not exist for anything else. You should never play this book. And they have kind of gone on to be like, you're a bad person if you play this book. I disagree. I think if you want to play the book, you can play the book. Okay? I think if you want to run Gabe's Vietnam game of we're in the jungle and we got sweat running down our face and we're addicted to morphine and you want to play
mine,
this,
but
yeah, if you want that, he specifically said no.
If you want to play these games, you can play these games, but you have a real ethical responsibility to the content that's in them.
Yeah.
As a GM and as a player, and everyone's got to be on the same page. Now, that's not me writing a little note from like Full Metal RPG to all the edgelords saying, "Oh, well, Full Metal RPG said I can do whatever I want." You're going to do whatever you want anyway. Mm-hmm. What I'm really saying is like, you have to question yourself, man. Am I going to do service to this subject matter? Am I really? Are my players going to do service to the subject matter? Are they really? What is the potential I have to harm somebody with this at the game table? People do get harmed at the game table. It's happened. Mm-hmm. I've hurt people at the game table. Confession time. I have. You know, that's real shit, and it needs to be considered. But that having been said, I think, art is art. You're going to do your art with your friends. If everybody consents to the art, play it out. What do you guys think?
That's kind of what I was thinking, was like, it needs to be an upfront conversation if you're going to have this. Like Call of Cthulhu, we play in the 1930s, 1920s. We have characters that are women and of color. Do we like have these, these institutions of misogyny and racism still exist and are still a thing, but they're not as expressed and upfront as they would have been in earlier time periods. We generally don't think that's fun to play, so we don't play those things.
Yes, that's important too, because I don't think anyone would ever really feel comfortable with like the GM being like, "Oh, you're a woman. You're not supposed to be on the police force. You're supposed to be at home," like kind of a thing. Like no one is ever going to find that fucking fun or cool. Like if you bust that out at the table. So.
Well, unless the point of the game is to fight these things, right?
Yeah,
it's fun to fight those things. I mean, I have like game like Velvet Glove, right? Or which is like you're a all female gang fighting against the misogyny of the world, right? If I'm playing the game master for that, I'm kind of like you have to bring it, or otherwise what's the point of this game? The point, at least from the design perspective, other than to play a cool all female gang, which would be fun nonetheless, but it's written a certain way. But yeah, sorry, Ashley, go ahead.
Oh, it's okay. Gabe, to your point of saying that no one finds that fun, unfortunately, there are a lot of tables who would find exactly that a lot of fun. I just don't play at those tables.
Yeah.
It goes back to making sure that you know who you're playing with and having that upfront conversation. I have kind of a couple of campaigns I'm in have kind of a blend of the same people and just different, organizational. Yeah. So, unfortunately, there are people that find that fun. And also, when it comes to whether or not you should be GMing something like that, Richard, when you were talking about, Velvet Glove and all of that, I think that when you are creating art or you're creating anything and putting it out there, one of the things that you should be asking yourself, is my voice the one that needs to be heard? Am I the one who really should be putting this out there? Because I think that there's something to be said for using your privilege. Like I said, I am a white woman and I have never had any bad experiences directly when it came with cops, except for when it was through my ex-husband who was Mexican. So there is something to be said for using my privilege to bring awareness to things, but instead of me being the one saying it, I can be a megaphone for other people so that you can hear their voices and their stories instead. So I think that that's important for us to remember too. Right.
And that's the kind of thinking about, there's a bunch of games on this back wall that could be very much in that same vein. So
yeah.
And so I was going to get to this next question here.
This next question is good.
Not that
the other one wasn't.
That was a great question. From Noland, any thoughts on relatively private I could really use a reading lesson. Any thoughts on relatively private representations of cops in home RPGs versus in movies, TV, actual play? Is the responsibility in the more public fora?
I mean, my initial answer to this is, clearly, like, the primary place where role-playing games take place is in private with your friends or your relatives or your game club or whatever. And like I said, Full Metal RPG is not going to like tell people how to run their games or what they can. We're not Minority Report. We're not going to suddenly descend from the ceiling on hooks with tickets. Go. You can play whatever you want to play. And that is up to the table. That's up to what the people at the table consent to and what kind of theoretical situations they all want to explore. Is there more responsibility in a public forum? Yes, 100%. Absolutely. I would never run a police-oriented game at a con. I would never run. I might still run Delta Green for my friends, in a few months or in a year or something when we've had some time to really cool things down and I have an opportunity to present an institution that is deeply problematic, and that's part of the game, that the characters have to navigate a problematic institution, and that part of the horror is their response to that problematic institution. If I'm doing a con game, I'm not going to run Delta Green. I'm not going to sit down in 3 hours trying to encapsulate that. I'm not going to run the risk of encountering some chud that wants to play Dirty Harry or fucking Batman or whatever. I'm just not doing it. I'm not putting myself in that position. And I would kind of strongly recommend that other people don't either. This tends to be a kind of self-selecting crowd. I'm saying, like, maybe let the people who are into that kind of shit self-select and kind of, so we know who they are. That's just me.
Yeah.
It goes back to knowing who you're playing with. I'm very careful about the tables I play with. Like, I don't know that I would sit down at a game, at a table at a convention. Like, I've run them, but I don't know that I would go and sit down with someone who I didn't already know.
Yeah. Seriously, I go to Gen Con, I lay down my tickets to play fucking something like that, and I have to deal with some chuddery. It's not going to be a good scene. I run a lot of Trail of Cthulhu at cons. At least I used to. And I think Trail, I'd still probably run Trail, because that is, again, kind of the more pre-police archetype kind of investigators. And I'm still mostly fine with investigators. I think while I have opinions on the investigative role-playing as a genre, investigators I'm fine with. Gabe, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, I think you have a higher risk of, like you said, encountering chuds, which I'm happy you use that term because I use that a lot too. You have a higher risk of encountering chuds and shit at like cons if it's something police oriented, because like, oh boy, I mean, I still encounter this a lot too. Like, I go to a shop or someone finds out I play D&D or something, and then immediately it becomes a fucking dick measuring contest. And I'm like, dude, I'm like 31. I don't care if you have more books than me or if you know the rules more than me. Like, cool. So like, you're going up against that. And then you're also going up against the potentiality of like someone coming and being like super pro cop. If like, they're like, all right, so you guys are cops and you're in LA. My initial reaction is going to be like, well, that's fucking lame. And then the last thing I need to deal with is someone being like, well, why is it lame? So I'm not going to let that like drag me down if I'm paying to go to like Gen Con or like, anything else. So I think I would just avoid it. But if for some reason my buddy, who I've been friends with since like 5th grade, we share the same politics and stuff. And he's like, hey, you want to play, I think it's called Spirit of 77 or something. It's basically a PBTA game where you're basically all playing like cops in the 70s and like shit like that. It's like, oh, that sounds fun. And I know I'm not going to have a bad time because I know who I'm playing with. Going off of what everybody said, which is know your table. Yeah, I'd probably be cool with that. But outside of the like my own doors or my friends' doors, hell no. Like, there's just way too many opportunities to just have a bad time.
Oh, yeah. So. Yeah. Richard, what are your thoughts, man?
I think that, I would prefer if, whether it was public or private game, that it was informed. Like, at least in the world of now. Like, I know that we should have been informed a long time ago. We've seen this forever. Like, there's no point in the future that I can see right at the moment where playing like Delta Green will be any different than it is right now or was unless the institution of policing has changed in such a radical way that we don't even recognize it today. That these stories,
it's a hot take. I love it.
Right, these stories and these characters are intrinsic to the fabric of popular culture. They have been forever since there was authority figures. So, like, I mean, knights are effectively cops. Because what they do is they go and make sure that you're plowing that field for the Lord when they're not off trying to be, save somebody, right? Which is also another problem.
They collect taxes.
Right. They collect taxes and they enforce the law of the fiefdom. So the idea that we can get away from using these tropes at all, like, I think it's so embedded that it's impossible at this point unless something radical happens. So to me, just knowing what you're doing, being informed is, and it doesn't matter whether it's a public or private game, is the way forward. And that's I think if you're doing it in public, say like with an actual play, you want to get a lot of bad feedback and maybe get canceled, right?
Yeah.
You do a cop game, see how long that lasts nowadays. So but
Richard and I have contrary views. He still wants to kind of like reach out and kind of like rehab some of these fuckers. I'm too much. I've wasted too much hot air on them.
Yeah.
No, I want to hear people's opinions, whether I disagree with them or not. So what I do with that information is a different thing altogether. So.
Oh yeah, indeed. What you do, indeed. Go ahead, Gabe. You have one last point.
Yeah. Just one last point. Just since he had mentioned kind of like the whole night thing and like just like your overall stance. I think too that it's so entrenched in also like what Brennan was saying. Like it's so entrenched in our media where it's like cops are good, cops are your friends. Like fucking Paw Patrol and shit for kids. Like. Starting them young kind of a thing. That I also it's like a fucking kids show where there's like dogs that are cops and they protect Puppy Town or some shit.
Paw Patrol. I thought you said Papa Troll.
No, Paw.
I play a lot of miniatures games. Sorry, guys.
Like who? What's this game? No. But all I'm getting at quickly is that I think too that like no matter what, we're so entrenched in it that you're always going to have those people that are going to be there to protect it and preserve that type of thing, no matter how far away we try to distance ourselves from like the normalcy of like, hey, let's play a game where there's like cops and we're beating people up kind of a thing. Like there will be people forever and always that will defend that, like, I mean, fucking look at LOTFP. LOTFP has made themselves very, very like aware of where their stances and shit are. And like, there are always going to be the edgelords that are like, if you don't like it, it's because you're too soft. And it's like, nah, dude, we just don't like the fact that you're defending a horrible person and like giving him money and shit. Like that type of stuff, that type of defense will always be there for that. I'm not saying that you shouldn't take your stance against that. It's just that type of issue it's just not going to go anywhere. There will always be people that will gatekeep, that will try to keep people out of certain games and shit like that. And it's just, I'm kind of like in the sense like with Brendan, where it's like, I've just wasted my time trying to like talk to certain people because those people will just, if you're not with us, you're against us. And it's like, all right, cool, man. Have fun like having no friends because you're shitty opinions. So.
Well, do we have any other closing thoughts here? Ashley, Richard?
I like the point that Richard made about unless things drastically, there's not really ever going to be a good climate to play that kind of game because it just made me think of like scar tissue. Like it's just basically a whole shit ton of scar tissue on the skin that is role playing and just society in general. And trying to work around that scar tissue is going to be very difficult. So I don't know what that's going to look like for the future of media or gaming or anything in general.
Well, if there's one thing I've learned over the past, seriously, like 30 years of role-playing, it's that role-playing games have an amazing power to breathe imagery into media. And if you look at the Vampire the Masquerade role-playing books that I was dinking around with in the early 90s, it wasn't even the 2000s. It was the late 90s by the time the gamers who had been influenced by those books started finding their way into Hollywood. And they started translating those stories into much bigger dreams that could be consumed by far more people and to incept those ideas into the sort of like mass dreaming conscience of the world. And so as communities, as like cells of people, groups of people, we have an obligation to the myths that we make, the storytelling that we do together, what we create, and then breathing that out into the world. And I think that role-playing sort of weirdly has the potential to just like to change a lot. And so let's use the role-playing games that we do to change the world that is beyond us, whether it's 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 100 years from now. Our collective action has the possibility to breathe new worlds into existence. And if feudal landholder, if you could go back in time and explain to him hypercapitalism, I'm pretty sure it was fucking Richard that said this to me. Maybe it was somebody else. They'd be like, that doesn't make any sense. That will never happen. That will never happen. The divine right of kings forever.
Exactly.
But it was over.
Yep.
Their world ended, and this world that we have created, that we have breathed into existence, will come to an end. What will be the next one that we will create with our stories and with our actions? On my way out, I just want to say this was a great episode. Thank you to everyone who chimed in. Thank you to Richard for putting it together. Thank you to Gabe for making the time. Thank you to Ashley for your well thought out opinions as always. We will no doubt get some bad emails from this one, because there will no doubt be some people who they thought we were their friends, and they will find out that we are not, and they will write us sad, tearful emails. And we've been getting some of those lately. Haha! It turns out when you do stuff like this, people don't like you. But what that means is that we actually got a bunch of bad reviews on our podcast by people who were like, "Oh, you made me so angry with your thoughts." If you have good thoughts about Full Metal RPG and you have not left a review on iTunes, we could really use your help right now. We are down to, I think, a 4.5, which is the lowest the show has ever been. And it's all due to Chuds. So if you want to really like wreck a Chuds day, like, can you come and maybe leave us some good reviews? That'd be really nice. That's if you like what we do. Also check out all the stuff, our link tree in the show notes. Check out our Patreon, our Discord, our website, whatever. What you have? What's up, Richard?
Well, I was gonna point out one more thing that the cops did that might have helped us all, is teach us what drugs looked like. And so, so I wanted to post up that we have a T-shirt where we teach people what RPGs look like. So I have made a Full Metal RPG T-shirt that looks like a program that the cops ran to try to tell us drugs were bad.
Those fools.
So those fools.
Dude.
We have a beautiful version of that T-shirt up on our TeePublic. Go to fullmetalrpg.com and click on "This is where we sell merch."
Oh man!
And it is. I love the T-shirt because it's one of those things where people will take a double take because they think you're wearing a old vintage Dare T-shirt, and then no, it's our T-shirt. So I love wearing it. But I just want to make a pitch for that because there is some things that we can all appreciate there. So
I remember real quick. I remember being in 6th grade and like Dare had us watch this video, and it was a cartoon of kids exploring the dangers of drugs, and they showed this kid sitting on his couch playing like a shitty video game or something, and they're like, "This kid is stoned. He smoked marijuana. Now all he does is play video games all day." And I was like, "That sounds fucking awesome! Like, what are you talking about?"
That's like the Star Trek episode where Tasha Yar was trying to teach young Wesley Crusher about drugs. She's just like, "Sometimes it just makes you feel good." And I was like, "Is this against? Is this an anti-drug thing?" Or yeah.
Yeah. I met Denise Crosby once. She's great.
Nice.
She's on the cruise every year, and she's drunk the entire time. She's drunk Aunt Denise, and she's just out dancing and having a great time, and I love her.
She's super great. She's when
awesome.
As a kid, I didn't care much for Tasha Yar, but as an adult, I've revised my take.
She's incredible. Mm-hmm.
Thank you to all of our listeners. Thank you for listening to this show. Thank you for making it all the way to the very fucking end. We love you. We thank you for listening, for your support. Thank you to our patrons. Have a good night.
Bye.